So I welcome everybody to the EICON session 2021 day 2. Yesterday have been a fabulous session with more than 500 delegates. So we hope for a good discussion today, and all of us will join in the discussion. So Subhasis, you can proceed and start the session.
Good. Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you all to the second day of the Eastern India Interventional Cardiology Conclave 2021. The first session will be on lipids. The session will be chaired by Dr. Anup Khetan, Dr. Devdatta Majumdar, and Dr. Uttam Kumar Saha. The session will be moderated by Dr. Soumik Choudhury. The expert panelists for this session are Dr. Parijat Dev Choudhury, Dr. Ajay Gautam, Dr. Moinak Mukhopadhyay, and Dr. Ajay Pandey. May I request the chairperson and the moderator to start the proceedings?
Anup has joined. Subhasis, Anup has joined.
Sir. No, sir.
Okay, I think
Anup sir is not there, sir. Majumdar sir is also not there, sir.
so. We can, I think, Manoranjan sir, I think we start the session and we start off with Arvind because he's already here. It's exactly 3 now. Okay, I think Arvind, you can start your session.
Yes, we can start.
Exciting topic, PCSK inhibitor new insights. So we go over to the Arvind.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your
Yes,
screen.
sir.
Fine. So let me go ahead. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes,
Please go
sir.
ahead.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this lipidology part of this session, the lipidology session this evening. I'm starting the session with a very interesting topic, I think, a molecule which is going to be a disruptor in the management of lipids in next decade or so. That is PCSK9 inhibitors. So this slide, basically nothing to be specific about it. We all know that cardiovascular disease are the top leading causes of mortality in the world, and management of LDL cholesterol is the mainstay of management of this, decreasing this cardiovascular mortality as far as this ASCVD is concerned. How can I? Yeah. So it's almost like stating the obvious that appropriate doses of statins are the cornerstone of management of ASCVD risk. And it shows not only decrease in cardiovascular mortality, but also all-cause mortality. So the question is, why PCSK9 inhibitors? Because there is a unmet medical need. So what does this unmet medical need mean? In real world, many high-risk coronary heart disease patients, they do not achieve the target LDL cholesterol targets, that is less than 70 or in some instances less than 55 milligram per DL. And in most of the places in real world practice, majority of the patient, they do not achieve this target. First reason is that we need something like PCSK9 inhibitors. Second is that even after, that was on with the statins. The second is that even after addition of ezetimibe, which has proved to be decreasing ASCVD outcomes, bad outcomes, even after adding this ezetimibe, majority of the patients, they do not achieve what should be the target of LDL cholesterol. And this slide shows that almost all, roughly 90% of heterozygous familial hypercholesterolemia patients, they do not achieve the target LDL cholesterol levels. And the second thing, the first thing, why do we need something like PCSK9 is that the targets are not achieved. The second is that even after giving high intensity and moderate intensity statin therapy, roughly 10 to 25% of patients, 10 to 25% remaining risk of cardiovascular bad outcomes stay. So because of these two issues, and third is, and the third issue is that with high and moderate intensity statin therapy, there are lots of patients, roughly 30%, up to 30% of patients, they complain of non-tolerating, intolerance to the high doses of statins or moderate intensity of statins. So these three are the main points, main things which lead to an unmet medical need for a non-statin lipid lowering, mainly LDL cholesterol lowering agent. So what are PCSK9 inhibitors? PCSK9 inhibitors are basically highly effective lipid lowering agents that can dramatically lower circulating LDL. I'll come to the mechanism in just a little bit now. As of now, there are two inhibitors, alirocumab and evolocumab. They are approved by US FDA and they are available for clinical use. And as far as I know, this evolocumab is also available in India. PCSK9 is a regulator of LDL metabolism. Its full form is pro-protein converted subtilisin kexin type 9. Is secreted by liver into plasma. It binds LDL receptor on surface of hepatocytes and target LDL receptors for degradation. So what exactly it does? So basically, going to the mechanism of its action, first we should just recollect it that the HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor that is called a statin, they decrease the cholesterol, they decrease the synthesis of cholesterol inside hepatocytes, and that leads to increase LDL receptor on the surface of hepatocytes. So that leads to more clearance of LDL particles inside the hepatocytes, and that leads to decrease in circulating LDL cholesterol particles. But what this PCSK9 is the enzyme, what it does is, it binds with the LDL receptors, takes inside. Normally what happens is LDL receptor, when that binds to, when it binds to LDL particles, it is intact to recycle back to the cell surface. But when this PCSK9 binds to the LDL receptor, this LDL receptor is internalized and it is destroyed, digested. So PCSK9 basically leads to decreased number of expression of LDL receptor on cell surface, and that ultimately leads to increase in circulating LDL cholesterol, and that leads to the increased CV outcomes. So what happens is that this this PCSK9 inhibitors, they are basically the monoclonal antibodies. They bind to this PCSK9 and they prevent binding of PCSK9 to the LDL receptors. That leads to decreased internalization and degradation of LDL receptors. And ultimately that leads to substantial, very high level of clearance of circulating LDL cholesterol particles inside the blood vessels. So that leads to decreased cardiovascular outcomes. Now, PCSK9, how it came into picture. It's a very classical example of, curious cumulative human mind. What happened that way back in 2000, it was found that there is a gain of function mutation with this PCSK9. So ultimately, this gain of function means PCSK9 is more, means LDL receptors are less, so there is a higher chances of ASCVD outcomes. So when this gain of function mutation was found in 2000, so the people started researching that if there is a gain of function mutation is available, then there can be even loss of function mutation can also be available. So ultimately they found it, and later on this PCSK9 was targeted by manufacturing human monoclonal antibodies as a therapeutic tool to decrease now, there is a PCSK9 inhibitors, they exist, and they are mostly the monoclonal antibodies. Now the question is, do they work? Are they safe? Can they improve cardiovascular outcomes? And can they improve mortality? The answer to these questions will come from, the answer to these questions has come from many practice-changing trials. The first of all, which I want to like to discuss right now, is the Odyssey outcome trials, which came out in 2018, in which the patients who had an ACS and with high risk of recurrent ischemic cardiovascular events, they were given roughly 19,000 patients with having basically high LDL cholesterol. They were given either, where is the trial? They were given high dose statin plus placebo or high dose statin plus alirocumab. And this is the result slide from this trial, which shows that roughly 60% risk reduction with the use of this alirocumab in addition to statins. And the median follow-up of this trial was 2.8 years, and LDL in the this PCSK9 group was roughly 50, roughly half of that in the placebo arm. And the incidence of adverse events were roughly similar in both the groups. And this PCSK9 resulted in reduced composite primary endpoint of MI, CHD, death, non-fatal MI, unstable angina, roughly 2% absolute risk reduction. There was also a reduction in secondary endpoint of all-cause mortality as far as this alirocumab was concerned. The p-value was significant here. And these reductions were more marked in the patients having higher LDL levels more than 100. So I'll come to this slide later. So this was the first trial, that is rather the second trial. First, the Odyssey outcome trial constitutes the important evidence in support of PCSK9 right now, as far as this PCSK9 is considered. The second trial, rather it's the first trial, that is the Fourier trial that was published in 2017, in which the patients of, this is the trial design, where roughly 27,000 patients who were stable patients, not ACS patients, who had established cardiovascular disease like prior MI, prior stroke, or symptomatic peripheral artery disease. They had higher inclusion criteria, where that even of a statin or even with ezetimibe, their LDL cholesterols were more than 70 or non-HDL cholesterol was more than 100. They were randomized into either the second molecule, that is evolocumab, that is 140 milligram every 2 weeks, or 420 milligram every month, or with placebo. And the follow-up was up to 12 weeks, and median follow-up was up to 2.2 years. And this trial showed that there was roughly 60% reduction in the level of, there was
Dr. Kumar,
60% reduction in the circulating LDL cholesterol.
Excuse me.
That is,
Dr. Kumar, you are already 1 minute past of your designated time. Would you please summarize that?
I will do that. So this was another land-breaking trial. That is the Fourier CV outcome trial, in which there was the primary and secondary outcomes were substantially different, less than roughly 2% absolute risk reduction with the PCSK9 inhibitors. This is an important slide which shows that I'll just skip to it just a minute. So now this is an important slide. This is a summary slide of the two important trials of PCSK9 inhibitors, that is Odyssey outcome and Fourier trial. This is the forest diagram that shows that almost all the primary endpoints, the PCSK9 inhibitors were better as compared to the placebo, in addition to statin. But as far as this cardiovascular death and all-cause death are concerned, this Odyssey outcome trial with alirocumab that shows in fact, that shows the trend towards improvement in survival in cardiovascular death as well as in all-cause death. But as far as this Fourier trial was concerned, this did not reach. In fact, it was more in, it was worse in cases of the PCSK9 inhibitor. So this is an important slide that shows that despite having improved other outcomes, the cardiovascular death and all-cause death may not be decreased with this PCSK9 inhibitors. So to summarize, I would say now, coming to the safety events, both these trials, basically they were concerned with that if you decrease the LDL levels to less than 20 milligrams, in majority of the patients, this was decreased. So can there be more chances of neurocognitive disorders? So these two trials also showed that there was no significant difference between the PCSK9 inhibitor and the placebo group, as well as the hemorrhagic stroke was also considered to be one of the considered to be one of the risk factors of decreased LDL cholesterol levels. But here also,
please summarize. Come to your last slide.
Okay. So I would say that this PCSK9 inhibitors and the new disruptors in the management of LDL cholesterol management. And before, it requires the guidelines now support it as a additional add-on therapy in patients who cannot achieve their LDL cholesterol targets even after using high dose of statins as well as sometimes ezetimibe. So maybe if we give some time and some more trials, if they can show more evidence to decrease cardiovascular outcomes and all-cause mortality, maybe we'll have better molecules than a statin to manage this LDL cholesterol levels and ASCVD risk. So I would just finish the slide. Yeah. So I think I'm done. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. I think we can go to the next speaker. We have no time because the time has been used up. The next speaker I think is Dr. Arindam Pandey. Arindam, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am there.
Okay, go ahead.
So, fantastic presentation, Dr. Arvind. So, after Dr. Arvind's presentation, my talk is to elaborate regarding the future of lipid management. Please give me a knock once I am left with 2 minutes only. I'll try to finish by 10 minutes. So future of lipid, as we all know, we are going through, this session is dedicated lipid session. So yes, lipids are the most important risk factor for future cardiovascular events. In fact, the risk is more than smoking and other behavioral things. Why we are so much concerned? Because in spite of using high dose statin, a significant residual cardiovascular risk still remains. So we just cannot control all the risks. So all the landmark trials of statin, they have shown that in spite of maximum tolerated statin, there is significant residual risk. So I'm talking about the future, what is beyond statin. It is very much understood that LDL is the most important culprit, which is responsible for adverse outcome related to lipidology. Now, after statin, we tried to use ezetimibe. Ezetimibe, what it does, very simply, it inhibits the absorption of cholesterol from gut. It has been evaluated in IMPROVE-IT trial, where it was found to be significantly better compared to moderate intensity or high intensity statin alone. Now, IMPROVE-IT risk score secondary prevention also showed there was significant reduction of events. Now, one thing we must understand, in India, there is definitely other factors which are responsible for so many early events, because in India, CREATE registry told us 1/4 of acute coronary syndrome, or to be specific, STEMI, affects individual less than 40 years of age. So probably apart from LDL, there's something else is also responsible, particularly the triglyceride. Many a time we do not give importance to the triglyceride, but it has been shown in the randomized control trial addressing triglyceride also do not benefit. But in India, particularly in diabetic individual, moderate high level of triglyceride many a time responsible for adverse cardiovascular outcome. And in this individual, LDL level may not be high. Yes, it might be small dense LDL which is responsible for it, but overall normal level of LDL and high and moderate high level of triglyceride is responsible for adverse cardiovascular events. So newer agents were tried. One of the very important agent is was evaluated in REDUCE-IT trial. Here eicosapentaenoic ester was used 2 grams twice daily, and it was found that there was significant reduction of primary composite cardiovascular mortality, mitral infarction, stroke, and requirement for coronary revascularization. And not only that, in secondary specified endpoint, cardiovascular mortality was also reduced. There was some controversy related to the use of placebo in this particular trial. The placebo which was used was proposed to be increasing the total lipid level, but later on even more important medicines are under trial. But this is very important aspect because this is the first trial. Apart from targeting LDL cholesterol, something else was addressed and it was found to be beneficial. Now, what is next? What is future? One of the things is bempedoic acid. How it works, it's very importantly, one of the rate limiting step of cholesterol synthesis is actually taken care of. And this has been evaluated in Wisdom trial, Clear Wisdom trial, which was published in ACC 2019. But it showed significant reduction of LDL cholesterol on top of statin therapy. Now, this is something else. Apart from PCSK9, some new avenue was opened by this bempedoic acid. But the problem is, whatever evidence we are having, the trial result, they did not include the clinical parameters. So I think future trials are needed with bempedoic acid, but yes, it can open a new avenue. Now, PCSK9 inhibitor, already we are discussing PCSK9. I'm not going to detail, but few new things about the PCSK9 inhibitor. They actually are the only molecule probably which can take care of lipoprotein little a. So as you all know, in South Asian population, high cardiovascular risk is partly responsible because of very high lipoprotein little a. If we screen proper individual with recurrent event and give them PCSK9, that can actually help because this is the only molecule. We have discussed Odyssey trial, we have discussed Courier trial, but new trials with PCSK9 inhibitor is GLAGOP trial, which is actually a IVAS-based trial, 18-month follow-up. On top of statin, evolocumab 420 milligram once daily showed significant reduction of the plaque burden. So that is something new, and GLAGOP trial showed us that yes, we can actually reverse the atherosclerosis. Now, one of the limitations of the existing trials of PCSK9 inhibitor, they were used in stable patients. Now, to overcome that, there was one trial known as EVOPAC trial with the same molecule, which was used in ACS patients. It was not a very big trial, incorporating only 308 patients, but this actually gives us some evidence because we always think that what is the most important period of recurrent event post ACS? It is the initial 1 year. So if we cannot start the molecule in hospital, probably you are not doing good to our patient. And EVOPAC trial, it showed that PCSK9 is completely safe, can be given, can be initiated in hospital, and it is very much well tolerated. There was substantial reduction of LDL cholesterol after 8 months. So there was rapid attainment of currently recommended LDL cholesterol goal. Now, another very important new avenue of cholesterol management is the inclisiran. Inclisiran what it does, it inhibits the PCSK9 synthesis by RNA interference. It is not a direct inhibitor, but it is working in different way. This has been developed by Novartis, and it is found to be very, very good in terms of reduction of LDL cholesterol. There have been series of trials with inclisiran. All of them, what it found that it is completely safe, and it has a robust LDL reduction property. And some of the trials are actually evaluating the clinical parameter, the hard endpoint, which in future can give us very important another molecule in this field. Now, all this new development has led to development in the recommendation and guideline. From moderate intensity to high intensity, the LDL cholesterol goal is gradually coming down. ESC 2019 says that in high risk and very high risk individual LDL cholesterol to be less than 55, and you can see the changes in 2016 and 2019. The goals, the targets are coming, and the percent reduction, we can see both target as well as percent reduction are now recommended. So we need to come below our target level, and baseline LDL cholesterol, how much percentage we are reducing, that is also important. So now PCSK9 inhibitor in some group of individual, it is a class 1 indication. To start, Lipid Association of India guideline, this is not a guideline, but rather a consensus statement has gone further. In some of the very high risk individual where there is recurrent coronary event, they suggest to go below 30. So gradually we are trying to attain a LDL cholesterol which is possible because of the development of new molecule. So gradually we are probably approaching to a avenue where LDL cholesterol at one point will be less than 20 or less than 30, like that. So I think I'll finish at this point. The session is open for questionnaires.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Pandey. I am Moinak here.
Hello, Moinak.
Yeah, this is an excellent and stunning presentation, no doubt about that. So, Arindamda, would you please enlighten few things that, yes, we are very much concerned that we are having so many young AMI patients in India, which can't all be attributed over to lipid level only. What personally we feel that there's maybe some other reasons of endothelial dysfunction which is causing the inflammation and culminating into ultimate this kind of problems. So is there any kind of other anti-inflammatory agents like canakinumab, methotrexate or colchicine that can be tried of in our Indian population? Do you have any recommendations or any, you can enlighten us, please?
Yes. This is a very important question actually. In fact, some of these molecules are already on trial. To see whether they can further reduce the residual risk. We are always discussing about this residual risk, but as of now, none of the molecule has shown the daylight, but some of them are showing us some light. Probably in future they can come, but I fully agree with you. Probably we need to think beyond LDL at some point of time. Yes, LDL is probably the most important parameter, and this is a modifiable parameter. We do have multiple options to treat LDL to make it bring it below some target level, but LDL is not probably solely responsible for all the acute coronary syndrome in our country. I already mentioned in my presentation, probably triglyceride do play a role. Now, eicosapentaenoic acid ester, which is not available in India, but it is available in Europe, it is available in US, and it enjoys a class 2A indication there. And probably it will come in our market as well in future, and some other molecules which also target triglyceride in a novel way. That can be very, very important. We are looking for them. And I do not see triglyceride to be a very benign thing, particularly in our country, because in our country, we do see many young diabetic individuals. So in those individuals, probably targeting triglyceride, and as you rightly mentioned, targeting the inflammatory pathway, colchicine. In some of the trials, colchicine has shown good response in reducing the event, particularly in acute coronary syndrome. There had been one trial, 2019 ESC, it was published. Colchicine showed significant improvement in the outcome, but that was in acute coronary syndrome. Whether we can use this kind of agents which takes care of the chronic inflammation to prevent the, not after the event, not for secondary prevention, rather to prevent used as primary prevention, that is very, very interesting thing to look for.
Another interesting thing is regarding food. If
Actually,
we
your
go
time
by,
is up, sir. Please close.
yeah,
the
that's
session.
one last question to Dr. Arindam Pandey, because his presentation was so fascinating. Just regarding food, if we go by the ESC guideline, they have written many things about the food in dyslipidemia patients. But whereas if we go through the ACC guidelines, although ACC has got another guideline for the primary prevention also, what is your opinion on this? Because as per our classical teaching, cholesterol from food is mostly related less than 10% to the blood cholesterol. It may be related to the metabolic problems like high triglyceride, low HDL, I accept. But regarding food and LDL, probably there is no such great relationship. What is your opinion?
Yes, I agree with you. 10 to 15% of LDL
Exactly.
change by food habit, and this is the cholesterol controversy. USA, it is very much clear. It's a genetic disease. Your LDL
Absolutely.
is determined by your gene, and if it is high, you need to take care of it by some therapeutic intervention.
Absolutely.
Food do not have a lot of things to play.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Then I think Sanjeev will be taking over. Next session is Sanjeev. Sanjeev, please start your session. Arindam, please unshare your screen so that Sanjeev can start.
I already answered.
Okay, I'm sharing. Yeah, is it there?
Yeah.
Okay. So good evening, Chairperson, my co-speakers, my dear friends, good evening. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk on this topic of omega-3 fatty acids and atrial fibrillation risk. Now, so let's go straight about, yeah. So how come this omega-3 fatty acids came into discussion? And it started quite back in about 1944. Sinclair et al. Was the first to find that there was a rarity of coronary artery disease in Greenland Eskimos, who had a diet which was very rich in fish, seal, whale, those kind of thing was predominant in the diet. And Bang and Dyerber compared this population, of Greenland Inuits or Eskimos, we call them, compared to the Dane or Danish population. And they also found that definitely the Danish population had a comparatively higher serum cholesterol compared to these individuals who took very high saturated fat and cholesterol in their diet. And it was predominantly a fish diet, which they took, seal, whale, and all that fish content that they had in their diet. So definitely there was something in this fish oil or fish diet which was helping them prevent coronary artery disease or cardiovascular disease, as they said. So a lot of trials came in, and you can imagine this from the market share of omega-3 fatty acids in 2019. In 2019, it was $4.1 billion US. That's the market value of omega-3 fatty acids in 2019, and it is expected to double by 2025. Now, so my topic will be focused mainly on atrial fibrillation because that is what has been asked. So it is time to rationalize popularity and belief in these molecules based on questionable benefits. That's what I would say, questionable benefits. So let's look at what it does in atrial fibrillation. Now, while omega-3 fatty acids were shown to have cardiovascular protection, it also was identified that they have some electrophysiological properties, and though it was debated, but they said that because it enters into the phospholipid bilayer in the cell membranes, it affects the ion channels, the transmembrane pumps, resulting in signal transduction affection, protein trafficking, ion channel kinetics, and gene expression. Now, these are all things that were affected by omega-3 fatty acids. And when I say omega-3 fatty acids, I'm talking about eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid. These are two main omega-3 fatty acids that we talk about. And so probably by getting into the membrane, it was having some kind of electrophysiological properties, along with the anti-inflammatory and anti-fibrotic properties, which were always demonstrated. So in 2016, in a publication, this is what the mechanism that was suggested for this N3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. They said that it reduces thromboxane A2, decreases the activity of phospholipase C enzyme, and in result, what it does is it reduces inositol triphosphate and calcium. and all that prevents atrial fibrillation. As I said, it enters into the membrane, and by that it does is membrane hyperpolarization, inhibiting sodium channels, again preventing fluctuations and causing atrial fibrillation. And obviously the anti-fibrotic and anti-inflammatory effect was always there as a protective mechanism. So based on these, there were a lot of trials, there's a lot of data, and I have kept this data like this just to show you the volume of data. So it was all studied in primary prevention, that is people who did not have risk factors of coronary artery disease, post-operative atrial fibrillation, patients who were going for cardiac surgery, in them omega-3 was studied, and it was also studied in secondary prevention. So with this entire volume, a lot of this is RCT trials, in spite of all these trials, what happened to the results? In spite of this volume of data, the results were disparate. There was no clear line that they were able to show. And Arindam just discussed about REDUCE-IT trial. So this was what has raised again hopes and has created some kind of flutter as far as icosapent ethyl, which is a very purified form of icosapentaenoic acid that was used in REDUCE-IT trial, which Dr. Bhatt presented in SKY 2020, and it showed significant benefits in terms of reduction of revascularization in entire spectrum, from stable to unstable to CABG population. In entire spectrum, it showed reduction of revascularization, which was really, really good. So it was followed by another trial called STRENGTH trial, which was not able to replicate the same data. And that is where the controversy comes. They say that REDUCE-IT trial used mineral oil, which blunted the statin effect, whereas STRENGTH used corn oil, which is more neutral placebo, and probably that showed a benefit. Another difference was REDUCE-IT was predominantly an icosapent or icosapentaenoic acid that was used, whereas in STRENGTH, both icosapentaenoic and docosahexaenoic were used. So those are controversies. But if you leave aside those controversies, what happened to atrial fibrillation? Atrial fibrillation incidence was high in both of these trials. And that is where the story comes. So this is a meta-analysis which has been published very recently in March 2021 from European Heart Journal. And what it did was it looked at these trials, and actually 4 of them are randomized trials. If you look at REDUCE-IT, look at STRENGTH. OMEMI was a trial which again looked at elderly population, very selective, again a secondary prevention trial, and all of that showed what? If you look at AF incident, the event incidents, they're all higher compared to placebo. 215, 159, 166, 135. So all of these trials did show an increased incidence of atrial fibrillation compared to the placebo arm. So what did Dr. Lombardi say? So while concluding his meta-analysis, he said that the mechanism of atrial fibrillation is unknown and we need to have more mechanistic trials to look at it. But for sure, they were all these trials were underwent a statistical analysis. We're making sure that the statistical parity is maintained, but they all showed that AF incidence was high in these subset of patients compared to placebo. So secondary prevention, higher AF. This trial has recently been published, JAMA, March 21. Again, a very focused study. And what did it look at? It looked at a primary population, that is effect of marine omega-3 fatty acid and vitamin D on incident atrial fibrillation. And this was a primary prevention trial. So what did it look at? Male 50 years and above, woman 55 years and above, no history of myocardial infarction, stroke, transient ischemic attacks, no revasc, no cancer, and exclusion obviously were dialysis, cirrhosis, and hypercalcemia. So vital rhythm study, again, a very large study looking at a primary prevention at a very large patient population, about more than 25,000 patients. So quite a large study. And it looked at both icosapentaenoic and docosahexaenoic, which was compared to placebo. And what did it find? And the dose used was 840 milligram here, ACC dose, HA dose, and it was at 1.2:1 EPA DHA. And they looked at incident atrial fibrillation. And at the end of follow-up, 5.23 years, they did not show any difference. So you can always argue that probably the substrate modification needs more time. That may be true, but at least at the end of 5 years, it was not able to show any difference. It did not show any difference in both arms. No decrease, no increase. So there was not much of difference in both arms. There is one limitation only, and that I would say is because atrial fibrillation in this arm or in this trial was identified by patient complaint. If the patient complained, then only it was recorded or identified, or if the patient was admitted for some reason and identified to have atrial fibrillation, then only they were taken to have AF. So that probably some of those asymptomatic AF episodes might have been missed, but that is true for both the arms. But definitely at the end of 5 years, it did not show any difference. And Dr. Gregory Kaufman, who is a deputy editor JAMA, said that in the background of all these 4 trials, it is clear that there may be a dose-related risk in the incidence of atrial fibrillation. At 4 grams per day, and all of these trials, reduce it, strength, they all studied icosapent at the dose of 4 grams per day. So at 4 grams per day, probably there is doubling of risk of atrial fibrillation. When you come down to a dose of 1.8 grams per day, there are some trials, I think Umemi used 1.8, they did not achieve statistical significance. Incidence was high, but it did not achieve statistical significance. And if you go to a dose of 840, which is AHA dose, then there was no apparent increase in risk of atrial fibrillation. So probably what he finally said was that when we prescribe omega-3 fatty acids at a higher dose, we must tell our patients that there is a higher chance of atrial fibrillation. So my take home would be, one, that omega-3 fatty acids, as far as primary prevention, secondary prevention, and effect after cardiac surgery, its role in as far as atrial fibrillation is concerned remains controversial. There is great variability in serum concentration in spite of same dose, and probably there is some amount of genetic predisposition as far as metabolism is concerned. I would rather say that some of the researchers have started saying this, that we must look at omega-3 index. That is probably in the cell membrane, we should look at the proportion of EPA and DHA, and then individualized dose in every individual patient, because diets are different, the way patients eat are different, and probably individualization of a dose might give us a clear result. So at this moment, we do not know what the final answer is. I'll end here. Thank you.
Sanjeev, just one small question: whether you
Yes.
personally would write omega-3 fatty acid for a patient who has high risk for AF, whether it is useful for any practitioner to write it?
My answer at this present moment in this background, purely for AF reduction, answer is no. If I have to prescribe in terms of cardiovascular risk, where it has shown clear benefit in some of the randomized trials, I would rather go for a dose of 840, which has proved neutral as far as as far as AF incidence is concerned. So that will be my dose if I go ahead and prescribe. So I will not prevent somebody from taking it, but if I have to prescribe, that will be the dose that I'll prescribe.
I have a small question, Sandeep.
Yeah,
is there any single molecule to prevent atrial fibrillation, not the antiarrhythmic? Is there anyone? Because AC inhibitor has some evidence. So any other molecule you'd say?
Offhand, if you ask me, your answer to that is no. There is not a single molecule which per se prevents atrial fibrillation, because if you ask me, atrial fibrillation per se is a disease is being identified more and more. Probably cardiomyopathy, whether it's secondary to a cardiomyopathy, we do not know what it is. So single agent which can prevent atrial fibrillation, probably my answer is no.
And AC inhibitor, your
yes, again, as you say, you also said that same thing. All of them have some amount of anti-inflammatory effect, and probably that is what oxidative stress reduction of fibrosis, probably they have a role. But per se, are they really going to affect the arrhythmia? Somebody who has got an atrial fibrillation, whether they're going to have a role, I do not know. I don't think data is there supportive to it. Yes.
But
Dr.
guidelines
R.T. Jadhav has asked one question in the chat box, whether using omega-3 fatty acid reduced VT in ICD patient.
Dr. Yadav, per se, when I went through the literature, I didn't see any such data showing reduction in ventricular tachycardia. My answer is no. I haven't gone through any such data which has shown reduction in ventricular tachycardia or reduction in ICD shocks by omega-3. Answer is no.
Okay,
your time is up, sir. Please close
go
this
to the
session.
next speaker.
Thank you.
I think he is Manoranjan sir is there. Can share this.
Yes, I am here. Should I proceed? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Please share your screen.
Are my slides visible?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet visible, sir.
Not yet. Slides are not visible.
Yeah, it is
Visible
okay.
now?
Yes, sir. It's visible now.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to Dr. Dilip Kumar and the organizer for inviting me to give a talk. Respected chairperson, the moderator and the expert panelist. My talk is on use of statin in special population. In the beginning, the special population may sound ambiguous, but the cardiovascular textbook of Brownwald, where Peter Davy has mentioned the following group as the special population. The groups are elderly, women, diabetic patients, people with chronic kidney disease, people with end-stage heart failure. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
These are the special group, and they are the non-Caucasian black population in another special group. And within this short span of time, I shall try to address all the issues. Let us go hurriedly. Now, statin in the elderly. Older patients are classified as patients with age over 60 or 65 years. According to the census projection,
Sir,
this
go to full
population
slide.
is increasing
Full
day by
slide.
day. The low birth weight.
Go to the slide, full slide.
Screen. Okay. 65 years, according to the census, this population in 3 decades because of the low birth weight and increased longevity of the population. Epidemia in Indian study shows that 41% of the rural population of elderly in central India have dyslipidemia. And let us have to concentrate on the role of cholesterol in the elderly people in causation of the ischemic heart disease. This plot on the left x-axis there is milliequivalents of cholesterol, and on the right y-axis the risk of ischemic heart disease. In the group of 40 to 50 years, with increase in cholesterol in the serum, there is increased incidence of ischemic heart disease. But as the age advances, the cholesterol effect is blunted in causation of the ischemic heart disease, and you see the curve is not so steep in the age group of 70 to 90 years of population. This is because that age itself is a high risk factor and which blunts the effects of cholesterol. Age is a stronger risk factor than cholesterol in causation of the ischemic heart disease. Now let us see, cholesterol causes ischemic heart disease, but what is the effect of lowering of cholesterol in the elderly? 39 milligram per deciliter, 1 millimoles per liter. Lowering of total cholesterol was associated with part of the ischemic heart disease mortality at the age group of 50 to 69 years. Is 1/6 lower mortality at the age of 70 to 89 years in both sexes. That means that with aging, the lowering of cholesterol effect is also blunted in respect of decreasing the incidence of ischemic heart disease. This is also same reasons that age is more a stronger risk factor than cholesterol in causation of ischemic heart disease. Now let us have a look to the Jupiter trial, which is a primary prevention trial of which about 1/3 of the population constituted of the population above 70 years. 32% of the Jupiter population suffered 55% of all the heart atherosclerotic cardiovascular events, and the LDL cholesterol was less than 130 milligram per deciliter. High sensitivity C-reactive protein was elevated. Rosuvastatin used was 20 milligram per day, and there was a 39% reduction in risk of combined cardiovascular endpoint and 20% reduction in all-cause mortality, and no significant heterogeneity in the treatment effects by age. Another primary prevention trial, HOPE-3 trial. This is also a primary prevention trial, and the older population was represented in good number, about 25% of the older population represented in the trial, and 43% suffered of all the heart atherosclerotic cardiovascular events. Rosuvastatin used was 10 milligram in this primary prevention trial. There was a net 17% reduction of the combined cardiovascular endpoint and there was a non-significant 9% reduction in all-cause mortality, which is not significant, and no significant heterogeneity in the treatment effects by age. So, in primary prevention, lowering of cholesterol is effective in older population, but not that in the younger population. Let us have a look in the Forrester plot. Forest plot. The meta-analysis of the combined Jupiter and the Hope 3 in age above 70 years, there was 26% reduction, relative risk reductions of cardiovascular events. The benefits should be weighed against the potential for a modest impact on longevity and must take into account the personal preference with regard to the use of preventive measures. Now, regarding the secondary prevention, cholesterol lowering is also effective in elderly people. That has been studied in the SAGE trial. Now, in stroke prevention trial, that is the Sparkle trial, included about 5,000 patients who were followed for 5 years. Patients had a prior stroke and transient ischemic attack, but did not have chronic heart disease. And the atorvastatin was used 80 milligram daily. The overall risk of recurrent stroke was diminished by 60%, and the reduction by 21% of the ischemic stroke. The mean level of LDL cholesterol was 73 milligram per deciliter in the atorvastatin group, while in the placebo group it was the 129 milligram per deciliter. Effects of statin on the elderly may be summarized as elderly people have so many comorbidities, so they undergo polypharmacy. So we have to choose a statin which has less drug interaction. And in this regard, rosuvastatin may or something is more efficacious. Now let us proceed to statin in the women. Gender and cardiovascular risk, CVD is major cause of death in elderly women, and obesity and metabolic syndrome are also more prevalent in the women. Women are underrepresented in many primary and secondary prevention trials. In major primary prevention trials, the number of women varied from 15 to 49%, and on an average it was only 20%. There is a gender-specific impact of transporter polymorphism on statin pharmacokinetics, and this is why lipophilic drugs can be preferred in women. Regarding the management of the dyslipidemia in women, the ACC guidelines state that intervention should include aggressive lifestyle counseling to reduce atherosclerotic cardiovascular risk. When appropriate statin therapy, if cardiovascular risk estimation indicates that the potential for benefit for statin therapy outweighs the potential for adverse effects. What about the ESC statement? Statin treatment is recommended for primary prevention of atherosclerotic cardiovascular diseases in high-risk women. Statins are recommended for secondary prevention in women with same indication and goals as in men. Lipid-lowering drugs should not be given during pregnancy is planned, and during pregnancy and during the breastfeeding period. These are some of the study of primary and secondary prevention where women are represented in variable percentage from 14% to 38%. The average is less than 20%, I think. And it has been shown that it is effective in lowering the cardiovascular endpoint in most of the study, be it primary or secondary. And the Stellar study, subgroup study of the Stellar showed that women have efficacy in reducing cholesterol so far prevention of cardiovascular event is concerned, and rosuvastatin proved the greatest reductions in LDL cholesterol and non-HDL cholesterol. Rosuvastatin 20 mg produced statistically greater reduction in LDL cholesterol compared with atorvastatin 20 or 40 mg. Rosuvastatin 20 mg reduced non-HDL cholesterol significantly more than the non-drug doses of atorvastatin, simvastatin, and pravastatin. All statin reduced triglyceride levels with similar effects across the dose range. So to conclude, in the women regarding statin use, that women in the primary prevention setting should undergo risk assessment with statin therapy initiated on the basis of guideline recommendation. Women with established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease should be treated with a statin. Statin therapy has been shown to be efficacious in women, and statin and other lipid modifying medications should be used in consistent with regional guidelines. Now, what about the use of statin in diabetic patients? There is no doubt that every
Time's up, sir.
diabetes patient, hello, every diabetic patient should have a statin. Now, lead study is a multicentric prospective cross-sectional observational study on 4,000 patients show that every second patients of diabetes are dyslipidemic and 9 of 10 have not reached the goal of LDL cholesterol. And diabetes and dyslipidemia show that it has high fasting triglyceride, low HDL, elevated LDL cholesterol, and predominance of small range LDL cholesterol, which is more atherogenic. Therefore, severe increases in diabetic dyslipidemic patients. And what about the statement of the American Diabetes Association regarding the intensity of statin therapy in diabetic patients? There is no scope of low dose statin therapy, always high statin or moderate intensity statin in all diabetic patients. More the risk, more the dose of the statin. What about the American Association say about the recommendation of statin? The group one recommendation in all adults 40 to 75 years of age with diabetes mellitus, regardless of estimated 10-year risk, moderate intensity statin therapy is indicated. And in the lowest category, in adults 20 to 40 years of age with diabetes mellitus, that is either of long duration or more than 20 years, or diabetes, type 2 diabetes mellitus more than 20 years, or type 1 diabetes mellitus, albuminuria, estimated GFR less than 60, should all receive statin therapy.
Sir, your time is up.
So this is a long topic. Statin therapy in diabetic listeners summed up in this statement. So statin therapy reduced CVE by 21% and vascular mortality by 13% for each millimoles of cholesterol reduction. Statin used in kidney disease, it is a very long issue. I shall summarize in one slide. That is use of statin in renal transplant, except in after renal transplant, statin is effective, but in end-stage renal disease, it is of no benefit. And after statin in the renal transplant patients, we have to see that when cyclosporine is used, atorvastatin is contraindicated and should not be used with cyclosporine. Regarding the end-stage diabetic patient, it is of no benefits found in some of the study. So it is a word of caution of initiating statin in transplant in end-stage renal disease. However, if the LDL is more than 145, one may initiate. Acute kidney injury is prevented with statin. Now, one slide regarding the advanced heart failure, Corona trial and GC heart failure trial showed that in the subgroup of patients with end-stage heart failure, statin does not reduce cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. So this is another caution of using statin in end-stage heart failure. So this is the concluding remarks. Differences in dyslipidemic patient risk factors and management issues do exist in the elderly women, diabetic, end-stage heart failure, and CKD patients. They are frequently underrepresented in clinical trials, which calls for more inclusive research that will develop stronger recommendation regarding use of statin in this special population. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very nice presentation and exhaustive presentation. I think we will move to the next speaker because we are very short of time. So, Ritupurna will start off with slide sharing. Ritupurna, are you there? Please start off.
So my slides visible?
Slides are visible.
Yeah, sir, it's visible. Please.
So the job given to me to discuss the need for aggressive dyslipidemia management in ACS patients. Let us start with a case. This is a 37 years male patient working in a corporate company and presented with severe retrosternal chest pain. History revealed he's a diabetic, hypertensive for 10 years, non-alcoholic and a regular smoker for the last 15 years. And which diagnosed dyslipidemia 2 years back, and he is on medication right now. Family history revealed father had multiple disease for which he underwent CABC 20 years back. And the lifestyle frequently is used to consume outside food for some job purpose. And on examination, patient seemed to be conscious, pulse rate is okay. Blood pressure is 140/80 with slight deceleration. blood examination not finding any remarkable, except the LDL is very significantly high. It is 168, triglyceride 210, and the HDL is 31. And initial cardiac troponin positive. And on medication, if we go back to the medicine chart, he is actually taking telmisartan 20 along with hydrochlorothiazide with amlodipine 2.5 and rosuvastatin dose was only 5 mg once daily, along with the diabetic medication like metformin and empagliflozin 10 mg once daily. So it's an infraval amine STEMI patient. How aggressive we should go to treat dyslipidemia in this patient. So angiography immediately revealed the RCA, it was 100% and 70% blockage in the OM3, and the immediate plan is to intervene the RCA and to go for primary angioplasty and evaluating stent deployment. So in this patient, we shall evaluate the patient for dyslipidemia management, and dyslipidemia management, how we can treat this patient with existing medication like rosuvastatin 5 mg once daily. That is a low dose medication. And we need aggressive statin management as the guidelines emphasizing. And the more important is that to prevent recurrent vascular events. As you know, there is 12% reduction of MASH event with regulation of plaque with reduction of the LDL. And statin promote plaque regulation that was corresponding or parallel to the reduction of the LDL cholesterol. So there is significant reduction of the necrotic core. The most important, the key notes here to identify the LDL as a primary target of therapy. Lower LDL is better to prevent pharmacotherapy and better lifestyle habits. Both emphasize 50%, both the guidelines, ESC and ACC, emphasize 50% or more reduction of LDL, and also to identify specific values of LDL to trigger further clinical action, because as you know, there is 10 to 15% of residual risk even after the LDL is reduced to the targeted level. If LDL-C remains suboptimal despite the maximum tolerated dose of statin and lifestyle, only then both the guidelines agree on the concept of non-statin therapy like ezetimibe in high-risk patients. So the ezetimibe is behaving like add-on therapy to statin therapy. So each set of guidelines, while addressing the primary prevention and also in the secondary prevention, is to find out the risk stratification of different types of patients. So the plan is to go for more intensive LDL reduction to reduce the mass. And before secondary prevention, what is the target? The LDL should be reduced by more than 50% of the baseline. And to the absolute target level, if we consider, so it should be below 55. For patients with ASCVD who experience a second vascular event within 2 years, it may not be the same type of event. It might involve the different vascular day. While taking the maximally tolerated statin therapy, the LDL target is threshold is reduced further to less than 40 mg per deciliter. And for patients with high risk, LDL reduction more than 50% from baseline and less than 70 is recommended. And moderate risk, as you know, the target is less than 100. So it is recommended that the highest intensity statin is prescribed up to the highest tolerated dose to reach the goal in specific risk population. So this slide clearly showing us that if we consider the very high risk patient like the ASCVD with established disease either by clinical parameters or by imaging studies like IVUS and OCT, and if the score is more than 10%, and the most troubleshooting is the familial hypercholesterolemia with a very high risk for cardiovascular events, and also in CKD patient with eGFR of less than 30, diabetic, long-standing diabetic of more than 20 years, and the patient with a target organ damage. So these are very high risk category of the patient. The target of the LDL set is 55 to reduce the significant vascular events. So in 2019 recommendation, ESC telling us that in all ACS patients without any contraindication or definite history of intolerance, it is recommended to initiate or continue high dose statin as early as possible. Earlier we can start the statin, so the more robust benefit in terms of the LDL reduction and also the clinical events can be found. So lipid levels should be re-evaluated 4 to 6 weeks after ACS to determine whether a reduction of at least 50% from baseline or goal levels of less than 55 have been achieved or not. The safety issues need to be assessed precisely at this time, and the statin treatment doses adopted accordingly. So at 4 to 6 weeks, if we do not get the desired level of the LDL, so in that case, we can consider ezetimibe on the top of the statin therapy. So the main pillar of this aggressive dyslipidemia management in patient with SCS is the statin, and then we have the pharmacological and other non-pharmacological treatment strategy to hit on the top of the statin therapy to get the desired level of the LDL cholesterol. The previous speaker elegantly actually describing the possible role of the hypertriglyceridemia in patient with SCS, and the recommendation is that you can start treating them if the triglyceride level is more than 200. And the most important is to note that it is actually the statin to be started with adequate dose to also reduce the triglyceride level. Then there is no need to initiate anything else than this statin in this group of the patient in the initial encounter. So
Summarize, sir.
So this is a slide showing the high intensity statin therapy. So atorvastatin we consider to be 80 mg and the rosuvastatin is 40 mg. So these are the dose of the high statin therapy. So this is one of the small scale trial. This is a yellow trial that showing us that whether statin modulate the coronary atherosclerotic plaque or not. And this is a small trial that is based on the FFR and the IVUS result. And if we aggressively treat with rosuvastatin 40 mg once daily, so there is significant total lipid core burden, which is plaque burden also. And triglyceride were also significantly reduced by use of the rosuvastatin. So the more important is that it should be adherent to this statin therapy. So if we continue to be adherent on statin therapy, there is significant benefit in terms of the mortality also and the recurrent cardiovascular events. So in coming back to this case, so I think we should consider the high dose, high intensity statin therapy, either atorvastatin or rosuvastatin. And if the patient is not received the LDL targeted dose, and then we can add on ezetimibe. So as previous speaker already very elegantly described this role of the evolocumab in management of the dyslipidemia to achieve the targeted LDL level very early. So this is one of the VOPEX trial that showing the significant plaque regression along with very significant LDL reduction, and the LDL reduction started very early of the starting of this molecule of evolocumab. And this is another trial, EVEX trial, and showing how we can reduce the atherogenic disease, and it is within 4 to 7 days of starting evolocumab, there is significant reduction of the LDL cholesterol. So if we consider PCSK9 inhibitor along with a high intensity statin and ezetimibe, there is almost 85% reduction of the LDL cholesterol. So this is one of the small but very important trial that the evolocumab can increase the thin fibrous cap thickness and also the lipid core that was shown by POSITI trial. So this small trial actually showing that we adding the PCSK9 inhibitor evolocumab to statin therapy have incremental growth in the fibrous cap, and there is significant reduction of the necrotic lipid core. So to conclude, high intensity statin actually the main pillar so far, and the LDL is the main target, but we should not forget the non-HDL, ApoB, lipoprotein A, and probably triglyceride. And familial hypercholesterolemia, both the homozygous and the heterozygous are real troublemaker. Ezetimibe has additional role to reduce the LDL cholesterol. So the faster and the earlier the goal achieved, there will be the better clinical outcome. Regression of plaque, atherosclerotic plaque may be an anatomical target, and PCSK9 inhibitor may be a game changer in the future years. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, sir. One quick question, sir. Which one of the newer molecules, that is the PCSK9 inhibitor, do you think is the most promising one, which will stand the test of time in the near future?
Yes, because what we our plan is to achieve the LDL level as early as possible, and to translate this reduction of the LDL to clinical reduction of the clinical events. So the earlier we start the PCSK9 inhibitor, and there will be the more reduction and more faster reduction of the LDL. So definitely this molecule is very
So
promising.
which one of the number of molecules have come in the market? Which one do you think is the most promising?
I have the experience of Repatha, so I'm talking about the evolocumab.
Thank you. So we can go over to the next session. We are already late. So I would ask the so Subhashis, I
Yes,
think
sir.
you can call the next speakers and the chairperson.
Yes. Thank you for such a wonderful session. Thank you, the respected chairpersons, moderators,